And now. Okay. Now, I ask something for you. You can answer. It's very secret. It's no problem. You know, it's not like in France we are in election period. No, so it's like le sondage. I don't know the word in English, but
survey.
Voilà, survey. Okay. Who thinks the first example is a blues? Okay. You have just one choice. Huh? Okay. So, no, just for the game, just for the play, you have to choose something between these three examples. Okay. I start again. Who thinks the first example is blues? Okay. It's like a little majority. Okay. Who thinks it's the second example? This is a musicologist, right? And who thinks it's the third example? Okay. No, you choose two. Jean-Marc, je t'ai vu. Je t'ai vu. So, okay. That's why we are in tenor with international, it's a concentration of specialists. The result when I do this kind of playing in some other situations is quite different. But the first example is bluesy. I use some cliché like that, and I put it. Okay, it sounds like blues. The second example is swing. I use the chords of blues, but I can play improvisation with arpeggio. This is the way of improvisation in bebop and swing music from late 20s to 60s, in fact. And the third example, it's real and deep blues for me, not just because it's some people say, oh yes, it's a blues because it's strange, it's weird, and it's sad. No. It's because I use something, I use one phrase, I repeat it, and I make the answer, the response. Question, response. That's why some blues is in 12 bars, 4 bars, question, 4 bars, question again, and 4 bars of response, but we have many different blues in 11 bars, in many different kinds of bars. And this example is very important for me because the meaning of free jazz, when you listen John Coltrane, he used every time this kind of construction. It's like musical box, you know, it's like a wall you construct with bricks, you know, with stones. And every stone is like a repetition. You use a vocabulary, in fact, very precise. But you can do anything but you want with it, in fact. And you can play avant-garde music, you can play free music, but to keep the feeling of the blues. For example, Albert Ayler, I don't know if you know Albert Ayler. For me, it's the most important saxophonist in the history of jazz. He's very avant-garde, it's very hard in free music. And he said, I want to find the truth and the feeling of Louis Armstrong and Sidney Bechet. For French people, it was very strange to listen back because it's very music of Albert Ayler is very far from Petite Fleur, you know, for musicologically, but in the feeling is right. And the use of blues and repetition in blues is very important to make a difference sometimes and make a link in history of jazz between Sidney Bechet, Anthony Braxton, Ornette Coleman, Cecil Taylor. Cecil Taylor, a very famous improviser in piano, he said in many interviews, I don't like blues music. Like Ornette Coleman. Ornette Coleman said, I don't like blues music, but not the music, in fact. they didn't like the meaning of blues with bad things, alcohols, drugs. They try to put this music in a high level as American classical music or American avant-garde music. But they use the blues every time in the meaning of improvisation. If you listen attentivement, very precisely, Cecil Taylor or Nat Coleman, you can find this exercise, this tool of repetition, question, response, like an old bluesman in Mississippi. It's the same thing. It's not about music of style. It's just about the tool, the meaning of improvisation, how I can improvise, how I can find vocabulary I can share for myself, but I can share with other musicians and play every kind of music I want to play with it. It's quite different philosophically than many groups of improvised music or the relationship between patrimony, memories, and repetition is quite different, in fact. And my research is about that because this meaning of repetition, this meaning of blues, the presence of blues in every kind of music as Sun Ra or Jerry Roll Morton, for me, it's a story of spirituality, of état d'esprit du jazz, very important. In France, this état d'esprit is quite difficult to understand because people like jazz in France are mostly anti-clerical guys. You know, it's a left parties or journalists from countercultural in 60s or surrealism in 20s, for example. And you have many examples of very, very strange interviews between Albert Tyler and French journalists in 60s in Fondation Meg near Nice, not so far from here. And Daniel Coe, a very important journalist from France Culture, he has a very beautiful interview with Albert Tyler. He is a left mining journalist. And why you played like that? Oh, because Jesus came in a flying saucer on my balcony and gave me the, okay. You can imagine the problem. And it was exactly the same thing in 20s when Hugues Panassier, very famous jazz journalist, created the importance of jazz in France when he discussed with Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington was a very, very believer musician, in fact, but came in from Cotton Club, played for mafia and for sexual shows, but in the same way, play for the pride of Black culture and in the same time, the pride of spirituality in this music with a very strong influence of religious music and mystical things, in fact. So this story of misunderstanding between people like jazz and jazzman is very important. And when I start my research, I do many research in, I have a Villa Médicis, hors les murs, about sacred in jazz in 2003 in New York. So I did many research in Schomburg Center. You know, this is part of New York Library for Black and African American culture. You have all archives from all old musicians from Harlem, for example. It's like, for me, it's like Vatican for theologic, you know. And the same thing under the frame of ANR project with LAIC and EHSS, École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, to study the relationship in the south of states, Louisiana, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, South and North Carolina, even Tennessee, to study the relationship between, for popular music, country music, gospel music, blues, and you know, all this, we call it Americana. It's a raccourci, it's a shortcut, but you can find, you can have a vision of all this kind of music, the relationships of popular musicians with improvisation and new technologies. And at this moment, it was in 2010, something like that. Jean Jamin, my professor in EHSS, and Marc Chemillier from CNRS and EHSS talked to me about a very, not funny things, but a very strange thing called OMAX. And okay, we have a seminar. We like today, in fact, I was exactly in the same situation. Even it was not in English, it was in Paris between French researchers. It was more easy for me, rather. But okay, we have a new software game. For me, it's a game, you know, it's a musical game. But no, it was very serious. We have a software very new from IRCAM with Gérard Assayag, and I will let Benjamin explain all the story of OMAX. And we want you interact and play with this computer as you play and interact and interagir with a musician in South of States. Because my job in South of States is to be a researcher as an anthropologist, but also it was an observer and actor in the same time, because my professor asked to me you have to play, and you have to play in your way and see what happens. And I will explain a few minutes later what happens, and I'm still alive, so it was okay. Huh? But in Paris, it was very strange for me because, as I said, I don't like at this time. I didn't like computer things and many things. I have so many problems to have to check with my saxophone alone, you know. And I said, okay, let's do it, but I don't want to know anything about it. Because it's no, stop. I want to come here. I want to come in this room, take my saxophone, just tell me what microphone is, and I play and see what happens. If your computer and if your software works, it's like a jam session. In fact, we do every night the same thing in jam session to play with musicians we never met before. We don't speak the same language, especially me, but we can play music together, even in blues, in bebop, or free music, or improvisation. Let's say, okay, let's do it. And it was a big meeting musically for me, because I start to play exactly as a few minutes ago. I start to play. I listen something. Oh, this is my sound. This is it's in first time it was like a loop pedal, you know. So okay, but very quickly, I have a real dialogue not with myself. I'm quite egocentric, but not like that. But I have a dialogue with something, with my sound, with my melodic phrases, but it was not me. And I was so excited. Say, what happens? And it was very interesting. It was very interesting because after this first session, Benjamin, Gérard, Marc Chemier explained to all audience, but to me too, what is OMAX. And my reaction at the end of this session, okay, OMAX is a blues man. That's why it works for me. And I don't want to deflorer all your, but OMAX use the same thing about repetition. It's exactly the same tools. And it was, for me, philosophically and musically, it was very, very interesting and very exciting to discover Gérard and all stuff from IRCAM, not famous to be very, very close to bebop, jazz, and scene, to have the same reflection. Okay, if we want to improvise with, it's not exactly intelligence and artificial intelligence, but if we want to improvise, and it was a big deal for IRCAM at this moment, because we have to remind the story of IRCAM with the situation of Pierre Boulez and what Pierre Boulez thinks about improvisation in music. And I don't speak about jazz. I have many examples of Pierre Boulez speaking about jazz. It's quite funny. Huh? Not funny. It was for us, for improvisation musician, it was a big deal in France because we lose years and years of presence politically in an institution because of that. So to see IRCAM, interesting about improvisation, this is the first thing, but also to discover the same tools I discovered in my research. In fact, okay, to improvise, you have to repeat. In fact, you have to construct something. It's not exactly like is not something about hazard. It's something about language, vocabulary, and to construct a language, you have to have letters. You must have letters, words, and construct something with basic things. It's all about logarithmic, mathematic things. And I say I don't have my degrees in mathematics, so I let it to scientists, and we keep going to have not separation, but I want to keep this naivete in a way, because now I know very well Omax. I know I think Omax is like a real musician. I can imagine what Omax will do, but the very, and I will finish with that, the very important thing for me, in fact, my way of playing changed in years because of Omax. And this is very interesting, because when I discussed with Benjamin, Gérard Sayag, Marc Chemillier, they told me at this moment, many improvisers don't want to play with Omax. It's quite the same thing of, it's like some people don't want to be photographié because I will lost my soul. But many improvisers, okay, I don't want to play with Omax, because in a jazz stories, we have a big moment in jazz story in the 80s with the start of boîte à rythme, drum box, for example. It was the end of job for drummer and rhythm section. So we are quite traumatized about story of technology in history of jazz music and improvisation. And many improvisers don't want, and we have some example, very funny, very famous musician in France, very famous for improvisation, came with horns and instrument. Okay, let explain to me Omax. Okay, we explain. Okay, I don't want to do it, and go back. So now for me, it's very important because Omax changed my way to improvise. Because Omax, it's like a baby, in fact, learn to speak, but very quickly, and Omax start to baby learn to speak from a very, very, very clever musician very quickly. And in fact, Omax, because of this research about the reflection about repetition, about construction with repetition, maybe something like few minutes after, play something I can't play. Technically, musically, Omax in few minutes became very, 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 very more and more efficient than me as an improviser. So for me, it's a challenge. And this is the second thing, very important in jazz. Jazz, in improvisation in jazz, it's a competition. It's a fraternal competition. But when you play in jam session and in a jazz band, you start your improvisation and say, I am the best. I have to say something to, okay, I know these things I play, I can do it, I can do it, and I'm only one to play this kind of thing. So Omax, it's challenged me every time. And when I listen some albums I did these last years, I can listen my way of playing on saxophone on solos very little by little. For example, on Omax is very efficient. You could heard it with Octavia acceleration, you speed or slow things, and construct very complex phrase. I want to do the same thing. I don't know how. It's impossible to do it, but I want to do it, so my way of playing changed. So Omax it's very interesting for me because I create something, I propose something to the software, and music changed because of it, but in another way, it's very efficient too. My way of playing changes, and I finish with it. Omax, it's something, but Benjamin is very important. Benjamin it's like a musician. I play music with Benjamin Omax. Benjamin, it's a Marxist, in fact. I'm saxophonist, he's a Marxist, not Marxist. Okay, it's Marxist, but you have many jeux de mots with it. I let Benjamin explain these stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raphael. Thank you, Raphael. You prepared very well what I'm about to say there. It's perfect. But just with raising your hands, who has never heard a presentation of OMAX from either Gérard or me? A few. Okay. So it may be worth recalling a few stuff then. I'm going to go in two directions. The first is somehow something of genealogy and print and how we came to OMAX and what derived from OMAX as well. And secondly, I'm going to speak a little bit about how it works, but really briefly, and you can feel free to interrupt and ask questions along the way. I'm not following any slides. I can put up some slides if you like, but I don't think I need them. So feel free to ask questions. So the first, we came from this. We came from actually what Raphael explained a bit earlier, and what he explained to me very clearly when coming back from his trip to I think it was New Orleans, to the Cajun, when you were with the Cajun. He told me how they play there, and they play all in circle, and the nearer to the center are the best players, and the farther from the center are the newer player. And even the small children or very new players can join. And I asked Raphael, okay, but what do they play? And he answered to me, well, simple. The person who knows how to play one note, he plays one note. He plays his note with the others whenever he feels that, or she feels that's pertinent. So OMAX is a little bit like that. We came from something called compression that you all use every day, because it's what is in zip files. Zip files compression is meant to reduce the size of your file, but it actually builds some kind of map of what is your file. And if you have this map, then you have some information about the structure of it. So we worked on these compression algorithms on music, and saying, okay, if we use this, so the algorithm in zip is called Lampel-zip, and if you use this Lampel-zip, then you have some kind of map of your files. We can do that with music and have a map of a piece. And so the idea at first was what is called style modeling, which is close to also to what Raphael said, saying if we are able to characterize a style, to decipher what makes something looks or sounds like Bach or like Mozart, then it means that we have captured something about it. So we came from style modeling, and at some point, so the team, I was not in the team at that time, but at some point they came to an algorithm called Factor Oracle, which has a kind of mystical name as well. Yeah.
This is big. I'm sorry, but when he's playing this first session, okay, we work with Oracle. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. I like it. It's like Sun Ra music, you know.
It's actually true that it's part of the meeting. So yeah, so they came to Factor Oracle, which is an algorithm extensively used, well, invented in the text community in Marne-la-Vallée, and it's very good at noticing and indexing all the patterns of any length of a text. And it has been extensively used in the DNA sequencing world. the crisp air techniques was, I don't know if it's still the case, but was based at first on that. And they noticed in that algorithm that there are some links that are not meant to be used to extract knowledge, but are still there. And they are meaningful for music in the way that they still indexed some continuation, possible continuation, or possible links between patterns. So they started to think, instead of modelizing the style, why not mimicking it? Why not making something sound like Bach or Mozart? And if we manage to do that, then we have also understood something. So they did that. They did that with offline stuff, offline MIDI files, online inventions from Bach and etc. And then they started to wanted to go to audio and live. Two things actually. First, they wanted to go to audio and not only MIDI, and then they wanted to go interactive. So they started to extract features, pitch at first, and to make that on pitch classes, and do that then not offline but online in real time, and be able to generate. So they went to this kind of interactions, and this is where I came into the scene. I started working in the team. They had some old version of OMAX generating some interesting stuff, but difficult to handle because it was quite of a black box. So one of the first work I did was try to see what is inside, try to show what is inside. And from there, I could actually go elsewhere, as some other PhD student and postdoc did, in some other directions as well. This is the second part I wanted to mention. This is the OMAX branch is only one branch in this genealogy. And this is also linked with the comprovisation part, because the OMAX per se stayed very uninformed of the overall structure, or of the let's say the chords that may be beneath, or maybe the predefined structure that have been decided between the musician, and so OMAX stayed a little naive, like you mentioned, but some other research threads started to integrate more knowledge into that, and this is where we go more and more into comprovisation. The first thread was SOMAX, which started with Laurent Bonas-Gao, who wanted to take care of some kind of verticality in the music, so some kind of harmony, even if it's not code labels, but just a way of listening to what is going on at the same time. And he worked on SOMAX, which is recombining not only the melody, but also the chords beneath. But it's doing that also mostly on corpuses, where OMAX works only live, if I can say it like that. But it's a second thread which goes into the direction of another kind of comprovisation, where you can actually improvise a melody, and then the machine is improvising the chord arrangement beneath in the style of, because we stay in this style modeling paradigm. So you can improvise chords in the style of Debussy, of Poulenc, or of any jazz player, provided that you have a corpus to learn from. So this is SOMAX. SOMAX 2 is actually public, and it's an autonomous software which works quite well. Then the second thread was opened by Jérôme Nika, also PhD student, now full-time researcher, who worked on the chord classification part. and on the chord label and the pre-planned scheme of a piece. So the idea there was that we can actually put into the same principle, the same factor oracle, put some knowledge about what is going to be played, what is the formal structure that will take place, and trying to navigate into that. So that led to another software called Improtech and DJazz. Both names refer to the almost the same software. It's still used as well by Marc Chemelier mostly. And then Jérôme took another direction or small step on the side as well. And this is what he is doing now at EURCAM. It's called DYCI2, which is quite, I'm unable to pronounce that, but let's say DC2 maybe. And this is another way of comprovising, because the comprovisation there is the comprovisation of the interaction. What I mean by that is the software learns the corpus that has been decided by the players that are involved. And the software, you can tell the software what features you want to extract and analyze in this corpus. So you make also the same kind of map that OMAX, but with this corpus. And then you can interact with the corpus, but again, the level or the features on which you interact with the software are planned, are written, are decided. Of course, they can be changed along the way, but the idea there is that you write the whole interaction between the corpus and the musician, both on the way you analyze the corpus and on the way you listen to the musician. So that's another thread again. So it's kind of a tree. And that's a good thing, because the factor oracle, from factor oracle, we actually extract trees of patterns. And so I wanted to show how this galaxy of software actually spread and are used or was used. I know that in Sandeep team, there was also some research about that and with another direction. So it's been spreading around, and we like it like this. So that's for let's say the whole context of the research. If I need to put some dates around that, OMAX principles were published, I think, in 2004. Then the versions were published up to 2008, I think. Then Jérôme, Laurent, and I started to come in the team, and around 2009, and we published the software along the way as well. And the last publication from DYC2 from Jérôme are from 21. So it's still active thread, and it's been more than 15 years now working on these things. I can go more into details about OMAX itself if you want. Is that useful? Do I take 5 or 10 minutes to detail that? I can do that. Okay. I see a few heads nodes, so maybe I'll do that. Okay, let's say that we have 3, let's say, objectives on OMAX. The first is on the fly learning, because here we are not on corpus based, we are really online. So we need online learning, and we want to be able to do the style mimicking in real time as well. So we want to create those clones that you have heard. We call them clones. It's not a good word, but we could call them virtual improvisers, but okay, I'm also improvising in a way, so whatever. So we want to be able to have this discourse playing in real time, and be able to put to make an interaction with that. It's actually interesting. Most of the people playing with OMAX, the interaction is really quickly going into a loop. What I mean by that is not only the software is influenced by what the musician is played, but the musician is influenced by what is played most of the time really quickly, which is very interesting. And in a way, it's we consider it as I don't want to say proof, but a clue that we are doing something interesting musically. The first test of this kind of software for me is you go in studio, you play with the musician, and you see what happens. If they want to play more, if they feel like it's going interestingly in the music, then we have succeeded for our task. If in 10 minutes they say, okay, I understood now, can you have something else in store, then we have missed the point. So to do all the three things I told you, we need to extract features, of course. At this point in OMAX, we extract three types of features. We extract monophonic pitch, we extract spectral features, namely based on MFCCs that are usually used for voice, but they are very good to make a classification for different play modes or techniques, extended techniques. So we use MFCCs, and we use chromograms to extract some kind of vertical notion, something like chords. It's not chords because it's reduced to 12 tones, and it's not labeled, but it's chromograms that we extract. And from there, we have a clustering mechanism to have the sensible and meaningful units. From there, we put that units, we put labels on those units. I go very quickly, but if you have a technical question, feel free to ask. It's just that I'm not sure this is the right place to go into full details. So we extract fixture, we label the units that has been clustered, and we put, let's say, agnostic labels in a way. That means that it's actually abstract alphabets. That could be anything. I did some experiment with some text from Beckett. It was very fun. Well, so that's a side note. We put some labels, and we put that labels into our factor oracle, which is roughly, no, it's not roughly, actually, it's mathematically equivalent to variable Markov chains of any order. It's been proven that it's equivalent. I don't know how they do that, but it's been proven. And it builds a map of all the patterns, all the repeated patterns. And this is a point where I join Raphael. OMAX is absolutely deaf for unique occurrences of anything. It actually recognizes all repeated stuff and not the unique ones. So we have this map of all the repeated pattern of elements.
It's a very important thing, because for improviser, it's a proverb in OMAX philosophy. In French, it's very efficient. It's tout ce que vous avez joué sera retenu contre vous avec OMAX. It means all if you do something wrong with OMAX take it, and you have to assume it and to play with it. It's impossible to hide something with OMAX.
Yes, that's right. It exists in English. Everything you can tell can be charged against you. Yes, so we have this repetition of patterns, and then we navigate this map, taking those secondary path, secondary arrows that I told you before, that were not meant to be, that are actually construction arrows in the real algorithm, but that are actually interesting musical. So we take those secondary path, and we chain patterns one to another with these arrows, jumping from one part to another, and that's how we make variation. OMAX is roughly a big machine to make variations on what have been played. Of course, if you can do that for one thing, for one feature, or for one clone, you can do that for several. So we have all the clones in parallel, all the features in parallel, and we can jump from one feature to another, and etc. The last point is we wanted and we voluntarily kept the realistic rendering, taking the sound of the musician for OMAX. It's not true for SOMAX or for DC. It's true for DC, though it's not true for OMAX. It's not MIDI, it's not synthesized, it's really cut and paste, because we have this map that tells us that it's going to be well suited to put those patterns one after another. And we wanted to keep that because for once the spectral and the chromograms are not well suited to synthesize. So it would mean a lot of effort to be able to synthesize with that. But before going into these features, we felt that the interest of the musician, or the some kind of curiosity of the musician we play with will be bigger if we confront it to its real sound and make him or her listen to what he or she could play but have not played. So this is a choice. So if I summarize, we have one strong hypothesis, which is there will be some things that will be repeated at some level, features, notes, chords, whatever, but there will be some repetition. That's it's a big hypothesis, but it's not difficult to have in music. And the second thing is we keep that mirror, that realistic rendering in the loop. Okay, did I speak enough about the technical stuff? Do you have questions about this kind of technical stuff? Yes. Yes, good question. This is perfect for my transition for the next part. I love it. Thank you. Yes. There is.
C'est pas improvisé en fait.
there is some autonomous part in the way that these chainings of patterns. The microscopic choice of pattern is automatic, but I have higher level choices to make. Biggest choice for any computer software, in particular in improvisation, but that's true for any comprovisation or composition, is when do you start? How do you decide when to start, and how do you decide when to stop? This is a musical decision that for now I haven't seen a pertinent solution in the computer to decide that. Let's put it like this.
And if I can say something about it, it's very philosophically, it's very interesting for me, because the human choice, it's about start and finish. And for improviser, it's a big subject. And I speak with some musicians, I told you, so some musicians are very afraid by OMAX. But maybe sometimes when computer can start and stop, then we can be afraid about it. Because for the moment, this is our choice. And if Benjamin is not here to decide to stop, OMAX can play for infinity time, in fact. And philosophically, it's quite interesting. It's also about, for my students, for example, and I invite today some students to listen this conference, which is, it's quite, I have some students, for them, very difficult to stop improvisation, and some other thing, very difficult to start improvisation. So this question, because of this interrogation in informatic and new technology things, it's very efficient and very clear because of OMAX, in fact.
So yeah, to continue the answer of for your question, except start and stop, I have a lot of buttons and sliders and a lot of stuff to control higher level parameters. And in particular, I can choose what parts of what I've been playing I want the software to use. I have a timeline showing me, oh, I can show you that. It's probably the only slide that is actually nice to see, let's say, or I find it nice. Okay, we need to wait for the projector, but so I can choose which region, which part of the what have been played I want the computer to play. I can, of course, it's on the way. C'est en train de s'allumer. I can lock one of my clones or several of my clones in specific region. It works? Yes, cool. So I can show you this one. Maybe the only one that is actually nice.
No, you have many other ones.
This is close to what I see on my screen. And so this is a timeline actually. And for each arc, there is at the bottom of each arc, there is a repeated pattern. And above are the patterns of spectrums. They are shorter in time. And below are the patterns of pitches. Okay, I don't have the colors in real-time interaction because it takes some CPU that is unnecessary, but I have kind of the same thing. And
this thing is very exciting for me for two reasons. It's first, it's the next step of our works. I hope. Very quickly, it's to create something. Okay, we create new music with it, improvise, but we can create a visual object with it. So artistically, for pluridisciplinarity of improvisation is very interesting. And here I am director of conservatory, but we are together with École des Beaux-Arts. So we have many things to do in connection between arts. And this kind of thing we can imagine. I hope very quickly, some performance with production, music production and visual art productions. So this is the first point. And the second point is very interesting musicologically. In fact, for example, maybe we will show you, we do many things with jazz solos, very important in the story of jazz. For example, John Coltrane, I Want to Talk About You, Coda. This is the only moments of Coltrane are alone. For Omax, it's very easy to play with John Coltrane because you are just saxophone and John Coltrane. And we do something with it. In fact, we play together. It's with this solo, I play with it and Omax can mix it. But Omax draw dessin, you know, this kind of thing of John Coltrane solo. And it's very efficient to see something in one second. You have a landscape of one solo, and it's exactly the same thing with Coleman Hawkins solos called Picasso. This is the first solo. This is Coltrane. This is Coltrane, for example. So if you put colors, you can imagine we can make arts and we can make analysis tools with it. It's very interesting because for students, for example, it's quite difficult to find on sheet music the meaning of repetition in Coltrane. It's impossible to see on chart and sheet music, you know. And when you do it with Coleman Hawkins solo in Picasso, it's very clear and very different. You know, you can see it's like if you see a draw of personality of musician, in fact, in 1 second. And if you read, we are in a big library like that. If you read 6 or 10 pages of sheet music of solo of Coltrane, it's impossible to see like that, quickly like that, clearly like that. It's very interesting for me.
Okay, this is just a small example to show you what kind of controls I have. You can see that here
I selected the two bottoms of the black arches. Black arches are actually longer pattern recognized. So I know that at the bottom of those two, there will be some common patterns. And I can lock this red cloud into both of the regions, so we can actually improvise with just this pattern. It's actually the arpeggio.
And we used to start our gig with Coltrane alone, without nobody on stage. And for Coltrane fans, I like to see what happens for Coltrane fans. It's Coltrane, it's a new solo I never heard. I like this kind of situation. We push the button very far, because after I arrive on stage, I play with it, and Omax mix my play with Coltrane play.
Okay, so
I say I was very go-centric, so I can assume it. But the last experience we did, it's because it's E sharp, E flat major tonality. It's very extended, but the standard I want to talk about you is in E flat major. And we do the same thing with Hors du Rhin ouverture of Richard Wagner. And we can mix and create a very beautiful and funny meeting between John Coltrane, Richard Wagner on this tonality colors, and we improvise together, and with Mourad Benamou, a drummer. You can imagine it's like a big free jazz German overture of improvisation.
Okay, it's perfect, because that Raphael jumped right away into the last part of what we wanted to tell you today is finally, how do we make music with that? Because we can make variations, we can make analysis and whatever stuff, but we want to make music of it, and we have been doing that for the past 12 years. So we had the time to experiment a lot of stuff. And the first, we will not talk about this experiment in the chronological order. I'll explain to you afterwards why. But the first experiment we did was, of course, playing in duet, playing just Raphael and I as we opened today. And so we liked playing together. 1 week ago, we were in Belfort doing that, and it has been 2 years since we played together. So we were really happy to meet again, play again together, and we love doing that.
Yes, Omax didn't like COVID too.
So that's the first and simplest situation. But then, as you imagine or have already noticed, there is some kind of systematic situation that comes into play, which is where the musician starts and the machine is behind. What I mean by that is the machine needs time to learn from the musician, even if when the machine knows one note, it can play one note. It's not enough to make interesting new music for us, at least. And so at some point we were tired of that effect. We were tired of the systematic starts where Raphael plays for 15 or 20 seconds, and then the machine can catch up. So this is where Raphael had the idea to put this Coltrane solo. And so we analyzed the Coltrane solo exactly as we would have done if Coltrane played on stage with us. And we
for
free. And we pushed, as Raphael said, we pushed the button as far as starting the concert with nobody on stage, except maybe me pushing one button to play and then getting out and see what happens. And then we started to do that. It was very funny in front of a jazz audience, as Raphael said. And then we, as Omax is not based on corpus, but really on the fly learning, and we put the Coltrane as if it was played by Coltrane. We could complete this Coltrane solo by what Raphael plays on stage at the moment, and it's sounds, like if we could mix those two sounds together, taking patterns from Coltrane and patterns from Raphael. So we started to have this transgression,
yeah,
of
iconoclast.
yeah, something like this. So and opening this door of external material, we explored a lot of different material. This is where it connects a lot. It connects a lot with what Raphael told you in the first part, because then we can input some heritage, some musical heritage of the jazz, the blues, or whatever document to dialogue, to discuss with the musicians. The second thing we put was the work song, I think. Yeah. You want to talk about that?
I work in Georgia with an ethnomusicologist called HRON. It's still alive, very important. I don't know if you know Alan Lomax. Alan Lomax was a very important ethnomusicologist, and he saved many kinds of music, in fact. And HRON is Alan Lomax of our time, in fact, and he did many recorded of old workers. Give is an example of work song used in 50s, you know, and we keep this tradition. So we put one work song, it's very special work song. It means we with a coup de pioche and the singing of call and response, you know, but he did it alone. It's only example of work song with one guy, in fact, you know, so it's very rare. And for Omax, it's perfect because the sound is strong, it's clear. And Omax can play with this clarity. We try to do the same thing with Alan Lomax present songs, very famous, but the sound is very heavy with many people's, because Omax take everything. So if you, for example, you can try to put Duke Ellington whole orchestra on Omax. It's not interesting. It's just mass of sound. It's quite difficult to distinguish for Omax. But something very clear is it's very efficient. So this work song alone, it's only example of work song, a solo work song.
It was recorded in his garden, right?
It's recording with his garden with a dog, like that, because his dog is very angry about why my master take it in this kind of thing in garden. See, it's funny because in Omax I play with a dog also. You know,
yeah, that's the principle. So we started this experience, and we actually did that experience with the band of Raphael. This is where chronologically, actually, we did that with the band before doing it just together. The interesting thing also in that is the question of pulse or timing, because Omax has no notion of pulse or timing. Which means that when you recombine this word song, the sound of the pikes are not regular at all. They don't fall on beat or off beat. They just have no beat. So it's just sometimes we have the sound of the pipe. So one of the game with the band that we did a lot of time on stage was taking those pike sound as the first beat of the measure, and the band was answering with the chord on the second beat, but they didn't know when. So we had this flexible situation.
It's a perfect free call and response, in fact.
So that's one of the games we had to make music and to develop that with the band. Another thing we did with the band was play with two Omaxes. Yes, because one Omax is not complex enough, so we played with two Omaxes. We had this concert in Aix-en-Provence with one Omax I was controlling and the other Omax, exactly the same software, controlled by Gérard Assayag. And we were, depending on the pieces, we were alternating. And I can assure you that it doesn't sound the same way when I play it and when Gérard plays it. For one main reason, which is, I think of Omax. It's a bit rough to say like that, but I think of Omax as an instrument, and Gérard is more thinking of Omax as a player that he drives. So that means that I interact a lot with the software to drive it very closely, and he leaves the software very free to go wherever. So it's not the same kind of interaction. So that's another variation that we had, another possibility we add to our tool as the blues to play with the band. Third thing is Valensol, the example of Valensol. Valensol is a composition from Raphael, where
talking about the encounter of Valensol. It's a UFO. It's, all the farmers from Valensol in '63 see in the early morning flying saucer in his lavender field. It was very famous in France in this moment, a very high moment of science fiction and how you say that, pseudo-scientist mythology, because it was very famous because all people came from all the world to study lavenders in this kind. And now we know this guy see just a gendarme helicopter, in fact, and because it was very early, we can imagine, you can imagine all jokes we make about lavender pastis and this kind of moments. But Marius Mas, it was very famous in France, this farmer, because of his episode. And I want to have a tribute to this guy because his life changed a lot because of it, and it was a big story. And Omax, it's a real UFO instrument, in fact.
Right, but that has nothing to do with the composition itself. I mean, with the tools used in the composition, but that's a funny stuff. In this composition, actually, what is interesting is that Omax is taking the place of the soloist at some point. Raphael wrote one part where he takes the solo and Omax doesn't play, but just records his solo. And then the second time we turn on the grid, Omax is taking the solo with the material that Raphael has played, but with as a deaf machine, without listening to what's going on right now, except by my ears. So we can alternate like this and have Omax play a full part, if you like, without being linked to always Raphael playing. That's another way we can write with that, and we are really deep in the comprovisation world here, because Omax is never gonna play twice the same. There is one random parameters in the middle of the process that I can actually deactivate, but at some point there is one random pick in between the three best choices, so it's never gonna play the same thing. Last trick or last setup that we had was with Mourad. So in trio with a drummer, the drummer Mourad Benabou being let's say totally free of Omax. I had no microphone on him. I was not extracting any information, neither spectral, neither pulse. And Mourad is a bebop player, but he's very fluent in fluid jazz. I don't know how you call that.
Like
something with no real strong rhythmic, but a lot of rhythmics, but no strong constraint on the pulse or tactus or whatever. And we could this way this is where we made also the experience with the Valkyries of Wagner, but we had this floating notion of pulse going on and off of the play, because with the repetition of Omax, even if the strict repetition is not there, the feel of pulse or of strict patterns and rhythmic structure is actually there. So we can actually have this kind of fluent tactus or fluid tactus in the middle along the piece. And then finally the Wagner thing that was some kind of collapsing a few experiences. How do we come to that idea with the Valkyrie? I don't know.
It's just because of tonality.
Oh, just because of
and because this overture of Hors du Rhin, I don't know the word in English and even more in German. You have one chord in E flat major with orchestra growth little by little. So it's like it's some musicologists or historians say this is the start of repetitive music. It's a pre-Steve Reich music. I'm not sure Steve Reich like this kind of connection, but it's quite true. You have 8 minutes of one chord, major chord. So, this is a good material for OMAX. It's like, because we try to find some drone things also. You know, sometimes I start my improvisation with a drone. OMAX take it, and I can improvise something else. So, wow, it's a luxury drone with Wagner, you know, so let's do it. But it's the same tonality. So, what happens if we mix for OMAX, take all information from Coltrane and Wagner and me, and take one improvisation of it? Let's see.
And we did that in concert in 2018.
Yeah,
I think.
And we have the project for next year to have a real orchestra, symphonic orchestra, play this part, and OMAX record it and to play with original material.
Finally, I can have a little peek on what is going on. I mean, in research today, the last few research part we had was to try to have OMAX to listen to itself in a way, not to improvise, but to give it some kind of structure. For example, very simply, to listen when we are on la tonique, the fundamental note, tone or note, and then when we are on the fifth or on the fourth, to keep some good blues structure, and have OMAX do something different on those notes. For example, transpose or whatever, make a chord on that, and try to have this kind of structure, post-playing structure in a way. I say post-playing in a way that it's not integrated as in the autonomous part of OMAX, but it's reflecting to itself and listening to itself. This is where we are now. And either you ask questions now or we play a little bit more.
One question.
Yeah.
How the software reacts to when the pitch change to the tone quality of the saxophone? Because when you start with what it is up and down, it's not the instrument, something different because of the tone, especially in voice situation.
Yeah.
It can be very funny to do yourself up, down, down.
Well, that again, that it's kind of an effect on OMAX that I put, that I can transpose what OMAX is playing. So the pitch up and pitch down that you listen to is some kind of post OMAX effects that I do. It still has some implication for OMAX because of this segmenting of units. So we had to do properly so that it transposes at the right moment and well. Now, in terms of learning, we can actually choose if OMAX is learning on a 12-tone range or all the octaves. We can choose if one A is equivalent to all the other A's, or if it's not. That's one choice we have. Then in terms of sound quality, we have the spectral description doing that actually. And when playing, I can choose if I want to improvise on the spectral description whenever there is no note, or it makes more sense to go this direction, or if I want to improvise on the notes. I have both in parallel, as you have seen, so I can choose which one to pick, or I can tell it to pick both. And sometimes the chaining of the pattern is justified by a pitch pattern, and sometimes it's justified by a timbre pattern. Yep. You mean my interaction? Ah. Yeah, that's true. Right now, it's not doing that. We could learn. I don't know if we have enough OMAX player to have several archetype or stereotype, but it's true. As I described with Gerard, that I interact a lot, so we could learn this interaction, and Gerard interacts a lot less, so we could also learn this interaction, and the musical result is not the same, and the interaction are not the same. Now, of course, we can learn what we do with that. I don't know. Once we have learned it, is that used to reproduce some kind of interaction? Is not going to take the decision of start and stop, even if you learn the interaction. So what to do with that information, I don't know. For now, we could discuss that. Interesting, because that the usual question I have is what happens when another OMAX is learning what OMAX plays, and you have a change of OMAXs like this. And the answer of this question I mentioned is very easy, but your question is more tricky. Yeah, sure. No problem.
And play music. Thank you.
On joue un peu?
Vous donnez plus ou...
Non, on joue un peu là. C'est un petit
Ah, elle a peut-être joué 5 minutes.
3 minutes, ouais.
Ouais.
Ah, non?
Non, moi je crois pas. Hein.
Ok, si, comme vous voulez. J'ai pas compris si elle disait que oui ou pas. Tout petit peu, allez, tout petit peu. C'est pas grave, les gens prennent du thé. C'est bien, c'est bien. T'as rallumé le micro? Merci. Ah non, je vais faire ma vue, sinon je vais avoir des problèmes.
Je peux pas montrer le...
Ah bah c'est compliqué là. Oui, c'est bon, c'est bon, c'est bon. Vas-y. Ouais. J'ai pas arrêté. Je pense qu'il faut que tu quittes, je sais pas.
Très sympa ton émission sur Futur, chemin de la philosophie. Ah, t'as écouté ouais. C'est pas un bouquin. Il y a le certificat direct qui sort dans un beau chemin de la philosophie, tu vois. Agréablement surpris.
Est-ce que je peux laisser la carte même si elle n'est pas branchée, juste pour pas avoir que tu vas rebrancher tout à l'heure?
Jean-Loup. Le neveu de Futur de créer la page de je pense que c'est
Merci.
Est-ce que je passe vers Eurological?
Ah ouais. D'accord, oui. Oui, c'est vrai, ouais. Ouais, bien sûr. Ben voilà. Merci. Bah, musicalement, on arrive encore même aujourd'hui, après 2 ans, à se faire plaisir à jouer et visiblement à comment dire, plaire au public. Quoi.
Alors, du coup,
C'est
un contexte.
Ouais, ça passe. Bah non, mais il y a enfin, ça part dans plein de directions parce que c'est la recherche. Hein. Mais oui, c'est un peu. Un contexte, c'est une direction qui a été prise par Véronica et par Marc au moment de la thèse de Jérôme. Quand Jérôme a fait son doctorat, il y a eu un contexte qui a émergé pour un truc vraiment plus base avec des accords, la technologie, tout ça. Et maintenant, je crois qu'il n'y a que Marc qui travaille dessus. Parce qu'il a passé complètement à Diemo. Mais Marc joue, et puis il joue encore avec. Bah, alors, malheureusement, c'est un peu plus compliqué qu'on l'aimerait, mais maintenant, c'est sur GitHub. Maintenant, c'est libre. C'est juste que. Pas les vendre, par exemple, parce que quelqu'un a des droits, je souhaite derrière. Et par contre, c'est sur GitHub. Ouais, à l'heure actuelle, ouais. Au moins pour Somax, pour Omax.
Max, c'est pas du son de
ouais, absolument. Ça à Maurice, c'est terrible. Oui, pas non plus du coup, ça a documenté ça. Voilà. Mais nous, on est là, on joue encore avec.
Ouais, non, parce que c'est pas des solutions, ça fait dommage.
Ouais, bien sûr.
À gauche ou à droite?
Je suis en train de. Au max, je suis en train de faire.
Non, je vais mettre là alors. Juste que j'ai le plus.
Pour que ce soit vraiment utilisé.
Oui, je trouve. Oh, moi aussi.
Le problème des improvisateurs, c'est qu'ils ont.
Compris en parlant. Juste surtout en parlant.
Oui, normalement, il y en a une qui est clairement. Ouais, tu peux l'enlever là. Oui. Ouais, bah, il y a qui est bouton, mais ça marche pas pareil.
Non, non, je fais des erreurs tout le temps, tu vois.
Merci. Est-ce que ça embête si je laisse mettre tout là?
Non, non, c'est pas.
Attends.
Vous avez acheté 1000. Je peux le débrancher. Alors, j'ai plus de batterie, donc quand tu me fais signe, quand c'est un quart d'heure, 5 minutes de vacances.
On était vu quand tu as mis.
Donc, ma présentation, elle dure 18 minutes, ça va?
Non, ben oui. Hein. Je vous comprends pas. De toute façon, je crois que je n'ai plus.
J'essaie toujours d'être. Parce que
Non, je n'ai plus de. Je n'ai pas assez de batterie. Donc, de toute façon.
Je vais me mettre un timer, comme ça va être bon. Vous allez voir.
Je vais juste faire une introduction rapide et puis voilà.
Oui, c'est pas bon. La dernière fois, c'était 18 minutes. Et vous, c'est Christine. Vous êtes ici.
Oui, je suis de président. We can switch.
Ah, you have this. Yes, that's what I need. Because when you share with through Zoom, you lose your text when it is written in the
Ah,
PowerPoint.
yes.
I have this problem. So you deal, okay, you have, is that what I just, I'm trying to solve, no problem.
You can send it to me if you want and use my tablet if you want.
Really? That could be. Oh, okay. I have my own computer. But then, you think it would be easy?
As you wish.
Okay. I will
Think
try to
about
talk to
it. Think about it while I'm speaking.
J'ai pas de micro. Jonathan? Jonathan? On n'a pas de. Peut-être ok. Ok, vous pouvez.
Ah, this is the song.
Non, je pense pas. Yann, ça marche? Non. Vous pouvez essayer? Allô?
Ouais, je crois que ça marche.
Bah, sinon, on va prendre.
I think we're getting slightly behind the schedule. Perhaps if we could come back already. It's a very short break.
Ce lundi est particulièrement. Mais je reviens. Je reviens déjà.
So if you want, we can continue. If you don't want, we can. Thank you. We are going to begin the first session, and if you want to take place and to okay. Tu veux plus fort ou ça va? So thank you for your presence in Marseille with the sun. And you have seen we have sun, and it's very rainy. There is 2 or 3 days, so you are lucky. First of all, and personally, I want to underline the enormous work by Vincent Tiffon, Jonathan Bell, Charles Pavia, Javier Elipe, and really, it's a very good job. And so I think that we can again applaud them for all this session and all the organization of Tenor here. And of course, all the team of Prism, but Vincent said that, and also the students of the Master Acoustic and Musicology from Aix-Marseille University. Thank you. Yeah, we can applaud too. So this first session is dedicated to the links between musicology and comprovisation. Comprovisation is a notion, a concept, founded in 2004, but Sandeep, you said me, by Sandeep Bhagwati, and which will be explored by the 3 participants in this session. As you know, comprovisation can be etymologically understood as the complementarity between composition and improvisation. This term reminds us that composition and improvisation have often been opposed, and how it is important to bring them close together from the point of view of musical practices around the world, but also from the point of view of the Western musicology. Let us remember Dallow's conception that composition and improvisation could be understood as a range of possibilities and transitions. Let us also remember the famous notion of inner score that Jacques Siron used in the 80s. So the term of comprovisation implies that improvisation could be linked to the musician inner score. This score could be a mental landscape, a kind of restoration of a behavior, a generative system, a model, an historical or cultural model, and a musical trace, archives, in the instant of the living act, a rediscovery of an already known for Bhagwati, for example. So we begin with the contribution of Terri HRON, and Terri HRON is a musician, performer, and multimedia artist. The contribution is and come from Concordia, University of Montreal. And the title of the contribution is Holistic Perspectives, a report on scoring beyond Eurological traditions. Because for me, composition is very important because it questions the interaction between genotype and phenotype in different manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't know to what extent I will speak on comprovisation, but I do work at Natural Lab, which is Sandeep's lab. And so welcome to this report on a consultation project on scoring and practice beyond Eurological traditions that was funded by the Tenor Network that worked out of Concordia University. Within the scope of this project, I interviewed 18 artists, actually more artists, but the 18 that I'll speak about today, my initial aim was to help expand the tenor community beyond its current Western and European cultural and geographic focus. The project led to my perceiving new boundaries around the notion of score that came together under a holistic approach. My relationship to tenor began as the coordinator of the Tenor Network, interested in non-Eurological scoring. My practice and cultural work outside of tenor focuses increasingly on equity, pluralism, and access, as well as on both decoloniality and hospicing modernity. I feel there is an inherent Eurological bias in conventional definitions and examples of sound scores. The regular interchangeability of the term notation with score underlines the assumption and privileging of written forms. I see most canonical or historical narratives of the musical work, and by extension, art music itself, celebrate the increasing expertise, precision, and affordances of writing, and by extension, printing and digital mark-making technologies, complexity, repeatability, and fixed ownership and capital. These narratives seem to follow principles of modernity and coloniality and lead to investment in standardization and universalism that deeply affects and shapes pedagogy, institutions, functions, and creative tools. The respondents included composers whose practice started in the Western classical music tradition and moved into interdisciplinary or cross-cultural work, visual or dance artists working with sound scores, Indigenous artists, women and LGBTQIA+ folks, and artists from non-European traditions. This list is, of course, not in any way complete or representative of everything. For example, popular or African music is completely missing in my respondents, but the goal was to start somewhere. In many scores, the sonic exchange describes certain roles whose boundaries can be fluid and overlapping and include initiators, creators, facilitators, participants, and witnesses. In Eurological music and scoring practice, Verk-Troje focused almost all creative energy on fixing the roles of the composer as initiator, creator, meaning maker, with the executant performer preferably participating as an invisible vessel for the composer's intention. This increasingly firm division and the creation of the cultural capital of art music coincides with industrialization, imperialism, and universalism. The standardization and normalization of Eurological music's notation developed in parallel and extends to software design and the merit standards. Many other configurations of roles exist, however. Creator could belong to legacy, tradition, or a connection to ancestral knowledge. In his book, Hungry Listening, Dylan Robinson describes the transmission of sound or songs as living entities that can only be shared through embodied experience. In such situations, could ceremony be the only appropriate score format? What comes of considering protocols for listening, reacting, or witnessing as creative acts? Probably the binary of oral and notated also is anchored in Eurological ontologies and the prevalence of European languages in writings on music transmission, and may have narrowed our understanding of both scores and roles. A holistic discussion includes performers as well as researchers, in addition to composers. In relation to the decibel score player, Kat Hope described an update to add an important annotation functionality, making it a tool for performer scoring. Likewise, critical editions could work not only to distinguish among manuscripts, but to support the importance of contextual and performative scoring for broader potentials of sonic transmission. The importance of community comes up when thinking within Indigenous ontology as well. Suzanne Kite explains, quote, Lakota concepts of truth and epistemology where their relationship to data or fact is not remotely similar to Western European ideas of fact. Jim Chaney says that things are true in these communities if they're responsibly true for the whole community. So you take that concept and then you get all the way to me trying to make scores, and there's no way I could tell a musician what to do or that the note they played was wrong. I couldn't even begin to have a relationship with notes like that. Many scores manipulate and shape sound in time in the lived experience. Most Eurological scores are to be interpreted sequentially with a maximum of synchronicity, and the technologies of writing, normalized and extended by printing, allow and encourage increasing polyphony, complexity, and repeatability. Other temporal organizations exist that emerge spontaneously or through long-term interaction. A Canadian artist working in interdisciplinary audio, performance, and installation, Lou Shepard describes the space of devising. I've been trying to figure out how to notate time and space within some system that people can look at and fall into, and then having a conversation about what happens within that time and space, and that being more what the score is, rather than actually this sound or mark. In other contexts, music can be created coordinatedly or in quasi-unisons using a common language, formulas, site, or occasion. An example of this is the common inter-arts language used by percussionists and dancers in Carnatic traditions, described to me by B.C. Manchinat. Interdisciplinary artist Charlotte Hug developed a form of scoring that allows for individual flexibility in timing within a group setting of diverse artists and makers. I had this experience where even each dancer could dance in their own tempo and timing. Interaction notation is a real melting point for cultures to understand different timings and also to invent symbols because you might need them. If scores include intergenerational orality, they carry legacy, tradition, performance practice, and the past itself. The notion of rag in India or shoga in Japan are both systems that connect and develop specific sonic ideas over time and decenter the notion of single authorship. When attempting to correlate score with the various Japanese flute traditions he practices, Kohei Nishikawa makes a parallel between the specificity of the interpretation of shoga and Western composers' intentions. Transmissions carried across generations survive if they adapt and inspire for each present moment. Dylan Robinson says, quote, "We understand protocol as always shifting, as a score with a wide amount of variation that actually seeks to standardize maybe only a value or a sentence, that only serves as a mnemonic for value that is expanded quite a bit in relation to the context specificity or what we're doing." There are oral scores meant to exist only ephemerally, both in time and memory, again decentering the composer. This is true for certain scores by Luke Nickel, who is interested in stepping out of Eurological score power dynamics and explore the affordances of failure. Or what about considering time beyond human generations into geological and cosmic temporal relationships in which we also participate? This might bring non-human beings and agents into the score-making potentiality. Let's let go of privileging mark-making technologies for a moment. Craig Beer agrees that there's a real distinction between the score and notation. They are two completely separate things. Notation is a very closed space. It's a very privileged vehicle with which to communicate ideas because it presumes the other person you're communicating ideas to knows the codes, end quote. Often the word literacy when speaking musically is used to denote familiarity with conventional notation, assuming reading and writing. The word fluency might encompass other senses and ways of knowing. Cat Hope connects knowledge of the transmission interface with musicianship. So how might the notion of fluencies act as a way to respect musicianship in communities and bodies of knowledge? Respecting scores or protocol might entail the privacy or primacy of connection within a specific group. Musicians from specific communities, but fluent in the dominant culture, might use these sonic events to subvert normative technologies and even work towards healing. This seems the case in Raven Chacon's American Ledger series, where elements of Eurological scoring and accounting are used to sonically grieve the forced migrations and violence towards Indigenous nations. Culture, place, and kin-specific transmission technologies and interfaces, and their inversion or subversion do not narrow the possibilities of scoring. They describe a broader field. In Western classical music tradition, instrument-specific notation, systems of marking legible only to practitioners of one instrument, were all but sidelined until the resurgence of extended techniques and electronic instrument scoring, which have mostly eschewed standardization. In other parts of the world, instrument-specific notation or language is fairly common. What is marked is but one part of the transmission. The instruments themselves and their performance practice would have been essential and are essential interpretive collaborators in the score. With digital technologies and artificial or non-human intelligences, possibly in augmented or virtual realities, there is an expanse of opportunities to engage not only with other senses, but several at once, multiplied by the possibilities of polydimensionality, multiple formats, transdisciplinarity, and more. In these early years of digital realities, a holistic approach to technologies of scoring can work to disrupt normative, universalist, and colonialist values. And perhaps if we succeed in the virtual world, we can do so in real life. The holistic perspective guiding the consultations was tuned towards listening for the emergent characteristics that are more likely invisible when focused on individual and/or dominant cultural practice. Holism is assumed possible even from a local node, and a holistic score is not itself an object or a goal. It may be an iteration of something broader. Today, I offer some practices that came up. Scores as mnemonic devices, as ancestral knowledge, as spaces of resonance, as interfaces, as boundary objects. This pluralism encourages relationships beyond individual experience and facilitates processes rather than outcomes. This points to a relational ontology when considering the nature of scores. So scores in many cultures serve as memory aids to help either a single practitioner or a lineage recall knowledge that was communicated orally and embodied. Orality is fundamental, with mark making essentially auxiliary. Eliane Radig's oral transmissions rely on the retention and mnemonic devices of the performers of her works. This implies a nascent performance practice, knowledge held, carried, and shared by these performers. Luke Nicol uses imperfect and fallible mnemonic devices, and his practice often relies solely on the incomplete memory of collaborators. What might happen if we experiment technologically with mnemonic devices? Carnatic mridangist B.C. Manjunath marvels how recording and social media technologies are affecting the speed and dissemination of formerly individually taught oral traditions, for example. Ancestral and what Kohei Nishikawa describes as hereditary knowledge seems to spiral and orbit around communities. Related to orality and transmission fixed within humans as a medium, ancestral knowledge challenges the authorially minded score definitions of modernity and coloniality. Recognizing sonic ideas that are part of traditional knowledge as scores, or more broadly as protected materials, is also a telling issue. For example, copyright is underpinned by notions of originality and personality, again tied to authorship and commodity, in a way that essentially devalues knowledge held in community. A strong conclusion from these interviews is that the concept of scores can benefit from greater consideration of ancestral knowledge, since these are quite prevalent in pre- and extra-colonial communities and practices. Language remains an issue, especially for me. Even finding English or French-speaking interviewees was challenging, and the colonial irony of that is not lost on me. Inextricably linked to language and epistemologies are the many scores that require or encourage response, reception, and sympathetic or perhaps antipathetic vibration from those using them. Inspired by Hartmut Rosa, Charlotte Hugh uses the space of resonance as a guiding principle in her intercultural works, where the oftentimes unexpected reactions that emerge become integral to her understanding of the score's potential. Sandeep Bhagwati describes the scores as relational as well, resonating not only between those who play them, but also in their material beyond the sonic realm. Created in relation to specific places and their histories, also Raven Chacon's scores often require the particular resonances of places and histories in their performance. Both Suzanne Kite and Craig Veer define scores as interface, as a place of linkage, of information exchange between a number of communities or systems. This prioritizes a relational ontology where the focus is on connection and collective creativity. Linda Bouchard also talks about interface as one of the iterations of the ocular scores project, where a performer plays the score-making device as an instrument, connecting the input and outputs of the other instrumental performers. Charlotte Hugh calls interaction notation an interface between media and disciplines. An interface allows for a much broader conception and agency for the score, far less dependent on chronos, but engaged with kairos, a quality that appeals to Sandeep Bakwadi, likewise interested in devising systems rather than focusing on sounds. Adjacent to the interface, I suggest the score as a boundary object, both plastic enough to adapt to local needs and constraints of multiple users, yet coherent enough to maintain a common identity that helps people from different backgrounds come to a shared understanding. Weakly structured, yet recognizable in common use, it becomes strong in individual site use. Raven Chacon's American Ledger series is a good example of score as boundary object, made more powerful as a historical and site-specific accounting through the personal investment of the performer and the collective. Might annotation and the collective improvement and critical addition of scores also be considered boundary objects? This definition works against standardization or convention that are often not focused enough on plasticity and local needs or on making many worlds recognizable. So if anything, this initial interview process established a real panoply of options. The main difficulty in launching such research without looking for a certain result is that only after a first round of interviews does any cohesive story begin to emerge. And so thus my attraction to this pluralistic or holistic approach that strives for greater openness to connection, participation, and difference. What quickly became clear is that the hermeticism of the notation and score research community might be related to definitions of scores, and that expanding those might help bring in practices and especially practitioners. Of course, pushing against the categories, methods, values, and not to mention the languages of modernity and by extension coloniality. It's slowed in my case by my background and belonging to white Western musical culture. But finally, and doubtless, the communities of sound and their modes of transmission will continue to change also as they encounter digital technologies, as well as artificial intelligences or beings. And this area is also of specific interest to me, and where I think such expanded definitions might serve. So I thank you for listening, and any questions you may have. There's a lot more quotes from the interviewees themselves in the paper, and so I encourage you to read those.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and we have time 5 minutes for some questions. No question? So you make me I have to question you. I would like really to understand the link between, it's a terminological link between the term of holistic and the conception of a score like and boundaries object, you know.
Mm-hmm. So the holistic idea came to me from just trying to consider many different kinds of transmissions as scores and not only written technologies. And so when I was in a Zoom meeting, as we all have been in Zoom meetings, somebody mentioned the notion of boundary object in relation to scores. It wasn't one of the people I interviewed, but I started to research that idea, and also that person's writing. Jake Moore is the name of this person, also from Canada. And it seemed to me as a really interesting way of thinking about scores, because it could include all kinds of protocols or technical manuals or ideas. And it relates to the notion of interchange, but it's not necessarily tied to a certain kind of technology, or whether it's writing or digital technology or orality, but it could be many of those things.
Okay.
So I thought that that was an interesting new way to think about it. And I hadn't seen anybody other than Jake Moore speak of it that way. So I wanted to present that to you today.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Gordon Forsyth? It was used by William Forsyth.
Yeah, and he's asked something as opposed to the same idea.
Okay.
The same ideas of the dance theory, which was understood through different dancers as the same material,
Right.
or as they were in the situation.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
I mean,
Thank you.
Dance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes from more from the social sciences. So maybe it's like, that's where they also are speaking about it from. But I'll check it out. Yeah.
More? No? So, thank you very much, Terri. You have two, so I'm going to. And that's what you have just you, not Clément. Okay, so we continue with another contribution about Diemo SCHWARZ. We are here, and Clément CANONNE is not here, but is here with Diemo. And okay, you have the title about notation, transmission, and comprovisation, and we are typically in a musicology of practices, of analyzing the practices of improvisation, about a case study of ONCEIM. Thank you.
Definitely. So, hi, I'm Diemo SCHWARZ. At the moment, I'm at the Institute for Advanced Study in Marseille, also associated with the prison laboratory. But usually I work at IRCAM as a researcher and developer, just as my co-author Clément CANONNE, who can't be here. And so I'll present a case study of the ONCEIM Improvisation Orchestra in relation to compromise pieces. And so I will say a few words about ONCEIM and this corpus of pieces and how they can be classified according to the modes of transmission, notation, construction, the degree of involvement of the musicians or determination, and also how notation continues beyond the work after the transmission by the composer. A bit about the role of electronics and a few points of discussion. So ONCEIM is an orchestra, an improvisation orchestra of around 30 musicians from varying backgrounds of jazz and improvised music, contemporary music, some noise and electronics music, and I'm one of the musicians in ONCEIM, full disclosure here. And it was founded in 2012 by the pianist Frédéric Blondy. And so we mainly perform free collective improvisations without plan or leader. This is coming to be known as electroacoustic improvisation. But we also commission pieces from composers. And so all in all, ONCEIM is a little bit an artistic laboratory
to explore new ways of creating and composing music. And so this is a table in the paper of all the details of the pieces created so far. And the composers are also either from an improvised music background, mostly actually, but we also have some composers from alternative musical styles, Stephen O'Malley from metal, or Martin Tétrault from turntablism, and composers a little bit more towards contemporary or electroacoustic music like Carl Nägelen or Vincent Laubeuf. And after the paper, so end of this month, we will create 2 more pieces at the GRM in Paris by Diemo and Alan Ackrow. So you're happy to come to that concert at Radio France, 29th of May. So looking at these pieces, we can quite easily distinguish 5 highly independent feature dimensions that tell us how we can distinguish them. And we will go through these with lots of examples. So the mode of transmission of the composer to the ensemble is most of the time based on a material score on paper. But we also have examples of purely oral transmissions in the piece of Iliane Radi that she wrote, composed for us, where the whole elaboration is taking place by in-person sessions with individual musicians or instrument groups. And also John Tilbury's piece started out with actually just a 1-page email with some intentions, but the actual composition took place in person with the ensemble. There's a very detailed case study on this piece by Tilbury, by CANONNE and Robert. And we also encountered audio scores by Jérôme Métanger, who composed loops on his instrument, which is a Revox open reel tape that the musicians should emulate, and partly the recent piece by Guillaume. And so for the pieces based on a material score, there's an equal contribution of textural scores and graphic scores, and just a few examples of using traditional staff notation. But of course, there's lots of combinations going on, and there's always a textual part, always some explanations in text. But here, this classification looks at where the main information for the construction of the piece lies. Okay, some examples of a mixed graphic and textual notation. This is the first piece for ONCEIM with a graphical score for the overall structure and detailed textual indications for moments of activity and material. Here's an example of little bits of staff notation within a larger structure, or an example of a piece completely notated in staff notation by Carl Nägelen. An example of graphic notation in its typical synoptic form, where you have basically the moments of activity of different materials, and also indication of dynamic evolutions, like here, or here that's a downward glissando. And graphic notation can also take on a more iconic form, with the graphics really symbolizing the musical material, pointillistic or kind of irregular forms. Or here, my favorite, the loops to be played are actually written as loops in this notation. The third dimension would be the construction of the piece. And this can be either using an absolute timeline that refers to a timer clock that is visible to all musicians, based on metric time with the tempo and measures, or on subjective time, meaning either there's a director giving cues when to move on in the piece, or this synchronization happens between the musicians themselves by listening. And there is also a few pieces that are deontic, that is based on rules. And of course, again, there can be many combinations of these modes of construction. And so, again, this piece as an example of a timeline-based score where you have the linear timeline in the global version and the time points written in text in the individual instrument scores. Or the piece by Stephen O'Malley, where the timeline is here very important and very kind of serve to very precisely synchronize the different instruments. Or here, more the subjective construction in Guillaume's piece. So the start of each page would be given by a cue from a director. But within each page, the gray boxes are to be started by musicians subjectively, really by listening to what's going on, except for the red or brick colored boxes that serve as tight synchronization points that cut the boxes before, or that serve to transition precisely to the next page. And also, this can be combined. Here we have partly metric bits in a greater structure based on cues and sections. And one example of a deontic piece by Eric Normand from the Grill Ensemble from Quebec, where here the rules are embodied by playing cards that the musicians can lay down, and each card will have a certain musical meaning for the ensemble to take up. Now, the fourth dimension is the degree of involvement of the ensemble's musicians, and which means the material can come completely from inside the orchestra, endogenous, like in Radig, or also in the piece by Boshard, where she asked each musician for his or her favorite phrase and some variations of it, and worked that into her composition. Or the material can be exogenous, kind of completely imposed by the composer, more like the working of a traditional orchestra. And in the endogenous case, the tension between the elicitation of material and the composer's own wishes is usually resolved through a participatory composition process, as noted by CANONNE and Robert. The degree of determination of the composition is again on a continuum between fully composed pieces like Titro or Ablinger and a completely open form, typically the deontic pieces. But of course, most often composers aim for this fertile middle ground where the choice of material is left to the musicians, but within a predetermined temporal and dynamic larger structure. So this can be seen very well in O'Malley's piece, where in this very fixed timeline, the different colors stand for a list of pitches from which musicians can choose. And of course, also the timbre is left up to the musicians to choose. Or here also the texture is prescribed, but of course the individual timbres and notes are left up to the musicians to choose. Okay, so in the paper you have this table that compares all these pieces according to the feature dimensions, and there's one last line standing for ONCEIM's collective improvisation pieces that of course have no notation and are always based on subjective time with high implication and low determination. So let's look a bit at how notation is used after a work has been transmitted to the musicians. And here we found also in an interview with Frédéric Blondy that the scores are often annotated by the musicians to actually reduce a little bit the indeterminacy to be able to focus more on acoustic coordination within instrument groups. And this dialectic of indetermination and determination is precisely what makes possible the distribution of creativity and authorship. So, as an example, originally, here Guionet wanted each musician to freely choose which block to play, but that was just impossible in the maybe 2 days we had for rehearsing the piece. And so the assignment of blocks to musicians was determined by him and the artistic director. There's also an aspect of transcription and renotation happening quite often. For example, the audio score of Nöttinger was sometimes simply transcribed into standard staff notation. That's the piano score. Or sometimes this graphic notation, which is just a screenshot of the waveforms, helped to clarify the tight synchronization of this part of the piece. And another point from the individual instrument scores like this, the artistic director produced a global score that is more traditionally organized with time from left to right. Another point to note is that even in completely orally transmitted pieces, like the one by Eliane Radi, there is always text happening in the afterlife of the piece. And so this serves as a memory aid for the conductor and musicians, but it can take on an almost normative function when the piece is transmitted to new musicians. For example, here in this note is written how exactly the accordion should produce the micro beating that the composer elaborated with the original accordionist. And this serves to explain to new musicians how to do that. So the last part will look a little bit at the role of electronics in ONCEIM. There are 2 electronic musicians, Arne Rivière, now replaced by Jean-Philippe Gros, with lo-fi, analog electronics, and myself playing gesture-controlled concatenative synthesis in Qatar. And the composers can have usually no idea what these instruments can do. And so mostly there is simply no special role for the electronics in the compromised pieces. The electronics is treated just like any other instrument, able to create varying textures, timbres, react quickly to what is going on in the music. There are just 4 pieces where the composer knew about the possibility of the instruments to record and playback sound in a transformed way, and 3 pieces where the electronics created a kind of global atmosphere. And the notation for electronics shows an interesting effect for staff notation, which is very precisely defined for acoustic instruments. Well, the electronics is then notated very indeterminately. Like, for example, in Nägelen's piece, the clarinet is very precisely notated, but the electronics just should do sparse waves following the clarinet. Or another example, this is a scoop, no one has seen this yet. That's the very first version of Jimmy Brooks' piece, where the orchestra is very precise and the electronics just says max patch 4. But I'm in contact with Jim. We will work on this together. And so for staff notation, and when the notation itself is less determined, like in text or graphics notation, then the electronics looks exactly like the other instruments, like here for Stephen O'Malley or Vincent Laubeuf, where's the guitar and electronics part. Okay, so just 2 points for discussion and maybe future work. So we saw a large variety of approaches that composers come up with, how to transmit and pieces and use and notate for electronics. But is this generalizable to other ensembles, or is it very specific only to ONCEIM? Part of this answer lies in the special role of artistic director Frédéric Blondy, who's not playing, but he really serves as an external listener, and also he's kind of channeling the communication between composer and the musicians. This optimizes the exchanges, basically, but also shapes them. And last, the role of these 5 feature dimensions. What influence do they have on how the pieces work with the musicians and maybe the audience? And here, preliminary conclusion is that the subjective time and endogenous pieces using material from the orchestra, they're more satisfying to play. And I think this is because these are exactly the strengths of an improvisation orchestra. Okay, I leave this table up while I take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for questions. No question? Yes, thank you. We can listen because
find a lot of similarity to this kind of features in accents and topology of accents, which also draws on like similar parameters, like for example, whether the user generates the text material or the text material is pre-generated. And also how it terminates, or how much agency the reader has when that's their story. And maybe it would be useful to compare it. I know at least 2 authors that's drawn from that into music, which we might have expanded this. There's Bach and also Orchestra, right from entertainment implementation, who addresses this theory by arts.
Oh, fascinating. So I'm guessing you, with hypertext, you don't mean the technical use of it like in HTML, but it's a literary genre of kind of interactive writings, interactive novels. Okay, thanks. Very interesting.
Another question or comments? Okay, what's been really subjective time? Because okay, all the 20th century, we know the second part has discussion about time in music and so. And what is for you or for the analysis musicologist subjective time? Because I think that time is always a percept. So
sure, but not when there's a wall clock with the seconds ticking. Then it is kind of an absolute time. But exactly, everything, our human experience is always subjective, and so this was going against the perception of time we have in the pieces, and so that's why the pieces that are constructed on the subjective perception of time work better.
Not metric, not
where the decision when to move on, the decision how time flows is a collective one, a collective decision between the musicians when a section is actually ended. And it's not like, oh, we still have five seconds, we must come to an end with our phrase. And so even when there's a director, then he will perceive where the music is and decide when it is time to move on to the next section.
We can discuss about that, but okay, thank you very much. Yes.
Yes.
Did it happen that you perform again one of these pieces? And did you see if the way that the score has been evolved during the collaboration and then when the composers wrote that this effect the second time that you played it, like forgot something, or like you noticed that something from the first time should have been written on the score and different educational systems?
Very good point. Yeah, of course, a lot of these pieces are reperformed. All the ones that have a recording are reperformed. I guess the one that is reperformed the most often is Ilian Radik's piece. And here, well, it's probably an exception, but because of the oral transmission, I think Frédéric Blondy takes maybe the most liberty with that piece, because he changes the order of appearance of the different instrument groups to try out different combinations. And so, yeah, that piece changes a lot in between versions, and also the timing, depending on the room, it can be from 1 hour to 1 hour 20. Really, yeah, we start to invite other ensembles to play this piece with us, and that of course changes totally the overall sound and the length. For the more determined pieces, yeah, there will always be optimizations. There will always be maybe little things that are forgotten when they were not renotated by the musicians more precisely. This can indeed happen. So yeah, always come to our performances several times to really know.
Thank you very much. So one more, okay. Yes.
So do you think this is more because of the imitation of the tools, which may mean that the composers only may say a score or a score, or do you think that it just doesn't interest anyone to mix and match artists?
You meant that only one temporal construction?
Yeah. Why is no one doing a 10-9 score with the
Good question. There are, of course, there are combinations. You know, there are deontic pieces with measures in small sections. Yeah, but I agree that there could be more experimental, more wild combinations going on. It's mostly a one choice. Yeah.
Yes, Charles.
Yeah, exactly. In Radik, there's no electronics. It's purely acoustic. I don't know yet. No, I will work with Diemo work to specify exactly what he wants, and then that will be a patch, maybe a recording, and some notes from me, of course. No. Radik's principle is that the pieces are elaborated orally, and they will be transmitted orally to other musicians. And so once she has done her work, the piece takes on its own life. And of course, it will change when it is transmitted from musician to musician. And we will see who will be stronger, the renotation made by Frédéric or the liberty of translation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have now the third contribution about Portugal. Yes. We know, but virtually.
Yes.
Are you Christine?
Yes, yes.
Oh, nice to meet you.
We have to.
Yeah, I need, yes, this is fine. And I don't need to go into Zoom, so it's okay.
You are by Zoom.
No, I don't need to use, yes?
No, you don't.
Oh, so perfect.
Just.
I have sound, is okay? It doesn't work this. Oh, sorry. HDMI.
Yes, yes. If you help.
This one. HDMI, HDMI, no?
HDMI.
Yes, this is not. Do you have, I asked Jonathan. No?
I'm sorry.
Oh, it works?
No, but no,
No.
because.
Si, c'est de la HDMI.
Oui.
Non, c'est pas de HDMI, ça.
Non.
C'est directement ça, là.
Jonathan Bell told me that. No, this is, it works like this. Let's try. This should, it works, it's okay.
Non, ça marche pas.
Qu'est-ce qu'elle a?
Sorry. It's okay? No.
C'est parce qu'il faut un.
Perfect.
Magalhães? Comment tu dis ça? Magalhães?
Magalhães. Does it work?
No.
No. I think only HDMI. Jonathan is not here. I need a adapter, HDMI, to connect. You know, this one.
That we need, you need a
Yes, this.
No. Okay.
It was work?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I have some. It works too.
But
yes?
you have to put it, yeah, okay.
This I know, yes. So, oh, great. So it appears like that. Yeah, okay.
Okay,
I'm
let's
ready.
Let's go. And the third conclusion comes from Lisbon and University Nova of Lisbon.
Yes.
And where a field is going to grow and to develop about archives and
yes,
how to preserve performing art, especially music or dance or performance. Okay.
Yes, I'm just.
And you have
the word.
Yeah, you have the word.
Yes, I'm currently dealing and working about music theater preservation. And I will try to talk a bit about, I'm feeling in terms, musicological terms, like an anarchist, you will see. Because most collections conceived in artistic domains, whether music, dance, or theater, has their performance and involve heterogeneous sources, such as text, images, video, audio recordings, music, scenery, gestures, movement, among others, are difficult to describe and document in archival contexts. And what I found difficult, I'm studying the work of a composer, music theater composer, the greatest representative in Portugal of music theater performative genre is Constança Capdeville. I'm studying all these features through her work, approaching dance, and other stuff that you will see, like building a puzzle, and therefore I'm using and studying, considering an archaeological musicology. So the problem is that the composers, she had a group, our own group. It was a small group, but they worked very closely together, and there are things that don't pass through the scores or the scripts or the audio. So there are elements missing, really. And I have been close to the original or former performers to ask them how they do those things, recreating somehow the environment of that time. And I'm trying to approach, for example, comparing with dance. What are they doing now? There is a a Portuguese group that is working about with TKB, transmit the knowledge base for performing arts, for the performing arts, in which they the artists, dancers or choreographers or so send the information they choose to send, has a way of archiving. Therefore, I call post-custodial forms of archives, because they go beyond the norms, the standards, archival standards, I mean, ISAD, GI, and so on. And therefore, they are not only choreographers or dancers, also companies, but they choose this information they will send or documentation, because as in music, contemporary music after the 50s, as we know, there are a lot of different languages, and this is a problem. We have, I think, until now, and you can say if it's true or not, what I'm saying, but until now, I think they don't find a proper or standard language in contemporary music. There is no standard language, whether in music, theater, or electroacoustic. We are still in finding difficulties in this sense. So they send this information, and they choose their own vocabulary or ontologies, and they can be connected with each other. And this is a way, therefore I call post-custodial. But before doing that, we have to work a lot on these works in gathering the pieces. So I'm just showing some examples. Another example is the way, for example, how to archive photography. Artists sometimes find their own ways. And we have an example of Duarte Belo, Portuguese photographer, and he has 2 million photographs almost, but it's still being paper, yes, película or film, película is Portuguese, film, but it's still being paper, just dealing with that. Not that we know, as we know, an archive is constituted by a lot of things, even our own archive, personal archives. But I tried to approach several ways of archiving in this kind of artistic stuff. And for example, another example, how composers archive their own archives or personal archives. My colleague of mine, Andrea Nogueira, made a survey asking a questionnaire, asking composers if they were really doing the work. How do they feel, if they were concerned about that? Because this is still a problem today. They deal with the things that are obsolete and suffer from obsolescence. And it's a big problem, as we all know. So 17% of Portuguese composers do not document or archive their works. And only 24, oh, sorry, this is a mistake. And only 24% are doing this. It's not a few things, but I know it's difficult. They are concerned about other stuff, but anyway, it's still a problem because we don't know if this music will arrive to us or to future generations, let's say. And this was the problem. As Constança Capdeville didn't think about that, they were working on performances. That is a unique thing and so on, performed only once, most works. And therefore, I have a lot of problems today to understand the way she worked, how to recreate her works today. So I will introduce Constança Capdeville. She was born in Barcelona, but lived most of her life in Portugal and studied there. And she's best known by her music theater works. So as I said in the beginning, most composers' documentation is scattered across different sources or even lost. So it is difficult to rebuild their music theater as they have improvised hypothetical components and known standard notations, alongside the obsolescence and deterioration of the carriers at the time, magnetic tape. There are no videos too, so scenic elements are difficult to recover today. And the documentation that she left is not sufficient today still, because most scores are graphic or prescriptive, and there are cases in which there is a thing I'd like to tell, because it's so simple. She wrote something like, here you must play polka cubista, and I was like getting crazy. What is polka cubista? So I spoke with the piano player, and she said, "Oh, but polka cubista was a miniature for piano of Eric Satie, and mixed with the ragtime from Scott Joplin." And I said, "Oh, really? Just that? So this exists really?" So, but if you don't connect the information, it will be lost, or you don't know what was done at the time. So, and in archival terms, this is difficult to connect to. And another problem is the magnetic tapes are at the end of their lives. So the work from 91 from Constance Capdeville, the magnetic tape is so important, as is the singer or the piano player, and is like this today. I don't know if you hear. Okay, can you? Oh, okay, never mind. So another thing I did was the dancer. There was a dancer in this group too. So how to document this part of the work? So I used, it is from this TKPB project, Motion Notes. It's a video annotator. You can annotate real-time performances, or video already recorded videos. But as I have just a few videos of Constance Capdeville's works, I tried this with the work of Federico, recreating the dance part. And this was really nice, because we have the tools to do sometimes, but if the information is missing, it doesn't work really. And I remember that one thing I asked him is, but what is the intention of the composer really? Oh, you know, I just needed to walk, or I don't know the word now. I will find here, but I was annotating very detailed information, like the arm is like this, or the leg is like that. But it really doesn't matter, this idea of a way of annotating movements or gestures. The idea is really to annotate the intention. And the intention was, he should just go around the piano with his eyes closed. So to have the sensation of going into the abyss. And it was just that. So I could just write that, as you will see. I've made the first annotation. Oh, let's see the movie. It's easier to explain what I mean. Doesn't work? No? Oh. Mine or here? Ah. Oh, okay.
Si quelqu'un veut bien.
Yes, now I will. Okay, I must go out. Yes, from the Okay, can you just okay. Okay. Integrado? Ah, okay. Okay. Will work now? Let's see. Because I have more sounds too. Sorry. Okay. Is it okay now? Yes.
Non, c'est pas ça. C'est là que
Ah, okay.
le service de le prendre.
This. Oh, now it will. C'est quoi le.
Non, mais
c'est pas le bon.
Il faudrait le.
So you can't hear? No. No. This is a pity.
Time is short.
Missing a cable, no?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, never mind. Okay, let's see the image. I will.
I think that we have time very short, so.
Yes.
But we can understand.
Yes. Okay. I go. Time is short, so I must go. The problem is that I have another sound to show. Okay. Anyway.
It's always like that. With
It's
technology.
always like that. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I have. I think it's this one. Yes. Thank you. Okay, so I will try to show you another example. It's kept double, the word double, that was very particular because at the time she used 2 magnetic tapes during the performance, real time, just being launched there. She used all the documentation that I mentioned, the graphic scores, prescriptive, and so on. And this was very, very interesting because musicians are being doubled by the magnetic tape and the mirror, just because the mirror would give indications, scenic indications. And there was a group of dancers, 7 dancers called Dança Grupo. No musician remembered that. So I was very, it was in the script, the mute choir. What is the mute choir? The mute choir was just these dancers performing scenic stuff, but the sound was being transmitted by the recording. So, and this was really a nightmare for me to find because nobody remembered. So 40 years have spent and nobody remembered. And I tried to make an experiment through e-analyse. All you know, you must know e-analyse created by Pierre Copry. Just because we cannot follow the score normally as we do with bar, because the notation is not is unconventional. There are no bar lines. So indeterminants is stuff, and that was a problem to me. And I tried to superimpose or overlap the score and try to create these 2 analyses. It has a guiding listening, something like that, just for you to understand, marking some elements that were missing and so on. So I will show you this example. Oh. Okay, this was another way of approaching the work, although I think it's not enough to archive the work, of course. And my idea is building this or reconstructing or rebuilding this puzzle first, and then to find a tool, conceptual strategy or so in archival contexts, although not fixing the work. And if you have some suggestions, I will very much appreciate to connect all elements and including this information, but helping the user. Because what I found is that the work of Constança Capdeville is not being documented or archived in the National Library of Portugal, because if you don't enter in the work, if you don't know the work, you cannot do it properly, of course. And this won't help the user or anyone that wishes to analyze or recreate the work will find always difficulties. So therefore, I'm just working in archival indexing and some things really in pure archival sciences, but trying to find this framework between archival sciences and musicology to put the pieces together. And that's what I'm trying to do. Just, I hope I don't know if it was a bit confused or not, because this didn't work in terms of audio and so on, but at least I hope you can have some suggestions and questions to me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, because we begin with the notion of comprovisation, but now comprovisation can be a large notion, and your paper is quite a notation of course of
sure
of performance.
Of performance.
So
yes.
you deal with the notion of notation.
Yes, I deal with that, although approaching in other ways.
It's another way to approach this time, but for me it's really nice. And have you some question about
Thank you for the talk. Really interesting subject matter that I wasn't familiar with before. Are there particular ways of measuring the success of a documentation method? And as you've made these documents, how do you gauge like that this was successfully documented? Is it by somebody who is unfamiliar, reproducing or viewing?
I think that someone that will just look at the work, even through e-analyze or the dancer, it's easier, sure. But I think it doesn't work really. I should find another way. Someone that is looking, oh, it looks nice, but it's not all information is there. And I found limitations really. This is my problem. I always find, when I try to use some tool, I find always limitations because there are a lot of layers working on it. It's not just a movement. I can do it with the video annotator through the dance part, but it's not dance. You see, through your presentations today in the morning and so on, workshops, I had some ideas for the score parts and so on, but the problem is how to put all these layers together, superimposed or overlapped, and to be, as our colleague said, having a holistic perspective of the work. This is my problem. Therefore, I'm trying to find a way of covering this lake, let's say, that I think is still a lake, that dealing with these works, music theater, but not only. Most works from that time, even Berio, the problem is the same, Mauricio Kagel, they all find these troubles, while they published because they had the support at the time. Some of them, they published the works, but the music theater is always a problem, I think. Sorry, You are late, I know.
We are about half an hour late. I've never seen that before.
But we are in Marseille, no? It's the first time it's Marseille. Thank you very much.
I thank you.
Two words to finish.
No, I finished already. It's okay. I think so. If you have suggestions, you can write
Yeah,
me.
you speak about archaeological musicology, so we can finish with that.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You have to prepare the one. Thank you very much for.
Okay.
We have to discuss together because with Josephine is, works with me. I mean, yeah.
Oh yes. So we can,
Yeah, we are going to try. We work about an open project now, and we would like to invite you.
European network about situation.
That's good, you know, but have you been here? Watching, have you been here? And so it was clear or not very much?
But we know, Isabel, we participate to the.
I know, I've been in the committee, organizing committee. Yeah, I've been there, but I was so busy with this stuff that they are doing that I haven't seen.
Yeah, and we participate to the European project, no? And C4 or.
Yeah, it was refused. I know.
No, just
next time we will do it.
So if you want, you are going to send you a little email. I mean,
please
but
do.
We see.
Yeah, I know. But he's in the archive.